weekly segment. Sheli G here was one of my guests. My other guest, Justin Foster, is in the middle of an airport, so he couldn't be with us today. But Sheli and I have a very interesting subject because this came about. We're supposed to meet for coffee. You went to the wrong place. I went to the right place. I mean, it was...
You were right. You're always right.
Well, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
That's my name. Right stuff. So, but the interesting topic we're going to talk about today is many people are misunderstood. And I think as a leader, dominant personality, I go back to sometimes I'm sarcastic. Mm-hmm. Sometimes I'm aggressive. Sometimes I'm high energy. Mm-hmm. I mean, all those different things that make Brandon who he is. Upon first impression, under different circumstances or whenever that time is, I could be misunderstood, right?
Right.
And I think that is something that at some point you're going to have to be aware of it, mm-hmm. because a lot of times people are going to say, hey, Sheli, that Brandon guy, he's a jerk. Mm-hmm. Or I met him. Mm-hmm. Boy, he's pretty arrogant. Mm-hmm. Well, that never gets back to me.
Right.
So how do I know?
Right. And how do we build on that? Because I think for most of us, we always want to be growing. We say we do. We want to be always getting to be better leaders and improving our relationships and our communication. But do we? Because that's the kind of feedback that we need. So how do we get that feedback? Hopefully some people do stay in our life and circle back and go, when I first met you, I misunderstood you. Or sometimes you can be intimidating.
Or try again.
Yeah.
Right?
Right.
You introduced me to someone that you know. My first impression wasn't that great, but I knew that you believed in that person, and so then I said, all right, I got to get to know this person a little bit deeper.
Right. But what if you didn't have that? Would you want to take another swing at that person? And that's actually somebody I've been speaking truth into too. The other day I messaged him and I said, your picture on Facebook, it's not inviting and warm. It looks like kind of cocky and it'd be great on GQ, but it's not inviting people into your business. So we've got to give each other that feedback. But how do you get that if you're not getting that? If you're so intimidating that you're not getting that feedback because people are like, I'm not going to say anything because they're intimidating. I think you've got to do some personal growth work. If you really want to be an amazing leader, do some personal growth work. That translates into your professional career.
You know, that word intimidating, I think I can be intimidating. Mm-hmm. I can be intimidating to get someone to pay their bill that I'm going to have to put a lien on the house, or I can be intimidating with my kids when they're acting out. I mean, or if it's in a conflict type of situation, right? I'm a fighter. I used to box. I grew up a logger.
Oh, that explains a lot.
Yeah, I know. And so it's like I have to recognize that, but sometimes my intensity, because I get excited about something or something goes wrong, oh boy, I might even be frustrated with myself, but the other person might feel, oh, what did I do wrong? Or they were a part of it. I'm not mad at them, I'm mad at the situation.
Right.
So I think being intimidating, I think at the same time too, us as owners, we don't want to open up our shell to our employees. Mm-hmm. And I think show our vulnerable side, mm-hmm. because we're the owner, mm-hmm. we're the leaders. And I think vulnerability, it's a tough thing.
It is tough, but it's really cool. I mean, obviously the owner or the leader, if you're a manager of a team, that's a bit of a different context than just the peer level. But yeah, being open and saying, you know what, we've had a tough month, so we are a little bit on edge, but you know, what can we do? So being transparent about what the context is and what's going on, because people know. They know when a company is struggling or the economy is weird, and just speaking a little bit of that truth, but letting them know I'm not blaming you, but how can we, you know, co-create this together is nice. But also, you personalities, and I'm more with you. I'm more the say it like it is and be really bold, but that can really freak people out who they're not confrontational. They may be more introverted or they may be more shy, which those are not the same thing, by the way, often misunderstood that they're the same thing. But they may have a totally different approach to communication or conflict, or even the potential that there might be conflict.
So that's a good one.
Yeah.
Introverts.
Yes.
Because I would guess the introverts are really misunderstood.
Yes.
Whereas a lot of times they're pulling back from a social situation. Mm-hmm. They could be mistaken as arrogant, cocky, something like that.
Antisocial, shy, all of these different labels that they get. So just like us extroverted achiever personalities, they also get very misunderstood and a lot of myths around them. but they handle those things differently. So how do we navigate that in the workplace? Because if you're the owner, you're going to think everybody's going to approach it like you, but they don't.
Yeah.
So how do we unpack that?
I say it like I say it.
Right.
You need to hear it like I say it. And then, so that's where that.
So people like me will tend to mirror you and be like, that's fine. I can come into you and tell you my thoughts or opinions, but there's other people that might never bring that valuable feedback to the table in a work or a personal setting. If they don't get that opportunity, you might have to go to them one-on-one. They may not speak up in a group context, especially if all the fired up, extroverted, these bold personalities are speaking up. There may be no room for other people to put their voice in unless you go around. I love the stopwatch mediator. Go around and give everybody 30 seconds or 60 seconds, and everybody in the circle speaks. So nobody overspeaks and nobody hides. That's a really great
But then you always get the dominant person, just like a presidential debate. They keep trying to speak after the buzzer's gone.
Oh, you say time. You say time and move on, and if they keep going, they owe $5. You give it to a charity at the end of the meeting.
Make it a penalty, right?
Right.
Yeah. So, how do extroverts not step on the introverts and really work together? Because I think it's a combination. I mean, you can't. I wouldn't expect you to adapt to my style 100%. I mean, we got to both meet in at some point to say, I'm going to be this way, you're going to have to give and just receive it this way. But I also need to look at what can I do to soften that approach.
Yeah, I mean, I like to say everybody is going to be uncomfortable some of the time. Because if I'm acquiescing 100% to you, I'm uncomfortable all the time. That doesn't work.
Probably not genuine or real.
And and vice versa. And it takes all those different types usually to do all the different tasks and things that go on inside of a business. But I do think as a team leader or a manager or an owner, you need to know what style your people are. Are they introvert or extrovert? And the question there is, how do you recharge? Like, how do you recharge your battery when you're tired? If it's away from people, that's the introvert. So they may be social when they're at work. It may not be antisocial or shy per se. But, what fills them back up? Maybe a company party is not their thing. So the reason they're not going isn't because they don't like you. It's because that's not the way that they refuel themselves. So you need to ask those questions right when they're new. Or, if you haven't asked them at least at some point once they come on board. And I like this is an old tool, but love languages. Now that sounds funny to bring that into work. Gary Smalley, love languages, right? But if how do people, do they want affirmation in public or do they want it in private? Some people get totally embarrassed if you give them affirmations at a group meeting. Some people live for that. So we need to know, how do you want to be acknowledged? Do you like it private? Do you like an email? Do you want a plaque when you're the employee of the year? Because we're all really different. And there's not right or wrong. It's just so misunderstood. But asking those questions, like, how do you want feedback if I see something that we need to work on? How do you want affirmation? How do you want, accolades? And they'll tell you, they typically they know themselves unless they're maybe super young. They'll say, this is how I work. This is what motivates me. This is what kind of turns me off or shuts me down. And they'll let you know.
And I think that's where you mentioned earlier, doing the Strengths Finders.
Yeah, Strengths Finders is so powerful. StrengthsFinders.com. It's an international bestseller. 30 minutes of quiet time, you take this assessment, it'll tell you your top 5 strengths. And for a team leader, it's paramount. You can put your team strengths on a chart and see
where everybody
is. And there's different categories. Some people are more relational. So they want you to go, good job, Brandon, and they want you to touch their arm. Some people are really strategic. They want you to give them a printout of what you're talking about. They need to see it in writing, or they need to see the numbers or the graphs. So I like to call those value propositions. That's what's important to them. That's what they understand. So if I'm going to speak to you, I want to speak to you not just from my value propositions, but how do you communicate? How do you perceive it? What's important to you, and what do you need to hear? I need to mirror some of that if I'm going to have a really healthy relationship with you.
Well, and I think that's where, like with my team, we use the DISC. They can then do the company analysis, put everybody in the circle, and you can see those dots are all over, right? I mean, there's very few D's in this company, probably because that's the way I hire it, right? You must be compliant. You must be submissive to me because I'm dominant, right? But I think a key component that I've realized is you got to have open dialogue, because the biggest thing that I see, and we start this off with being misunderstood, is if I say something I want to make sure that you've understood or understand what it was that I said and what my intention is. Because the biggest frustration for me is when I say something to someone and it's like a 180. You know, their interpretation of what I said was negative. Maybe I was trying to be positive, and then they don't say anything about it.
Right.
I mean, open dialogue means, can you explain more of what you just said?
Right.
That didn't make sense to me. Well, you're not happy with me. And I think that for us as dominant individuals, we need that.
Right.
And we're okay with it too. So
Right.
it's you that has the problem telling me that I offended you, or I wasn't clear with you, or give more explanation of what it was I was saying.
But to be fair, some dominant personalities say they want feedback, but they don't receive it. They don't receive it. They shut down. They get weird. It feels like there's repercussion for saying it. So some people go, in their mind, they go, there's no value to say it. I may just pay a price, but there won't be any value. They've got to perceive that there's value from it. It'll make our relationship better. They'll consider my feedback about this, whatever it is. But if they don't think there's going to be an open space, boy, I've actually told managers before, unless you want that feedback, don't ask for it. Unless you're ready for whatever, they may come in it a totally different way than you. So don't have meetings and just say, okay, everybody say what they think. Be ready. And don't make them wrong or bad if they say then what they think. It may come across totally different than what you thought.
Well, not to mention teenagers.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
You never listen to me.
Right.
Right? I mean, I think that's a big deal is
extremes.
If we become the authoritative person at home when there's discipline involved, we do need to listen.
Right.
You know, and I think that's where raising teenagers, you can practice at home with all the issues that you have there.
And here's a great tip. If you're going to start a conversation that you think might be difficult or you think you might have different viewpoints, start it with my experience is. You're not saying it. It's not truth as a capital T unless it really is a universal truth like gravity, right? It's like, well, my experience when we did that job and we kind of had that riff was this. And then what was your experience? Okay, so then you say what your experience was. So because we can have two very different angles into the same situation, but oftentimes we go, well, this is what happened, you know, and we put it out as as the totality of a situation instead of just saying, here was my angle or this was my experience. It's a great way to set context where it feels like I can now share my experience.
Yeah, and I think too, when you're dealing with individuals, I mean, really taking the time to making sure that you're not hungry, making sure you're not tired, making sure that you're not busy, right?
Yeah.
Because if I'm busy typing on my computer and you ask me questions and I'm only halfway and then I'm getting frustrated because I'm dealing with something.
Or don't wait too long.
Yeah.
Oftentimes in America,
so many situations.
We wait until we're really upset and then we talk. But then it's and everybody's pretty shut down and defensive. There's very little success in that. So being proactive and talking to each other more frequently, even scheduling, blocking out times. There's some people that will never come to you because of their personality and say,
they're just not
we need to talk. So like having a quarterly or a monthly or whatever you feel like you need for your, culture is important to just, let's have an open dialogue. Let's talk about what's working and let's talk about maybe what could be working better.
So the last question is, how many people do you think they shut off the video halfway through, right? I mean, they said, I'm this way. They just need to deal with it, right?
Right.
I mean, how many people probably started watching what we're talking about and was that person that says, oh, I can accept feedback, but then really can't, right?
Yeah, right.
I've been that person, so I know
Right.
what it's like. I mean, it's just, and it's a work in progress. I mean, you got to get better. Talking with Sheli G, you can find out more about Sheli G at shellyg.com. You can catch her in Vegas. You can catch her at the Funny Club, right, in Boise. She's doing stand-up comedy as well as coaching. Thank you for being with me today,
Thanks
Sheli.
for having me. It's always good.
I think this is a great subject that we need to look at how we communicate and how the other person receives. Thanks for joining me. This is Brain and Wright Stuff Radio.